Hi, time for an episode of the Thought Project, just so you know. And I decided today I might change things up a little bit by recording here, maybe sitting in my little director's chair and sort of talking to you for the show instead of the normal atmosphere of me, starting out with the singing and sort of dancing and just kind of have like a chat before the Halloween weekend here and start with a few old sort of ghost stories. And I want to go back to when I was living in Wisconsin, in Janesville, Wisconsin, because I went through an incident there. Cersei and Wilhelm one year, as I nicknamed them. That was the Russian couple that tried to keep me. And I was supposed to have been able to leave them behind at the age of 18. And then unfortunately, they spent years stalking me and trying to keep me and labor trafficking me to Kendrick. And it's important to note that their daughter, Patricia, Cersei, Wilhelm, and Patricia are all part of Silver Lake, which is an investment in Kendrick's agency out in Hollywood. So that's how that kind of all ties together. But I don't want to give you an old Swift story about Cersei because she was working as a pastor, quote unquote pastor, in this fake front church that the FSB had put together in the US, and that's called the PCUSA. And the PCUSA was ever actually, you might want to say, there was an actual Presbyterian church in the US at one time, but they weren't called the PCUSA. So look for that tagline because the PCUSA was actually driven out of North Carolina. They had originally been based there, and then Cersei and Wilhelm had lived there years ago and ended up getting into trouble into some court conflicts. And then during the time that I lived in the DC area, they actually ended up driving the PCUSA out of North Carolina altogether. It's been a smaller and smaller church. It's a cult group. They very closely work for the government of Russia and support Russian interests. They also very actively supported the hostility between Israel and Palestine. And I knew members when I was in the DC area that openly talked about the fact that they just wanted the Israelis and Palestinian people to fight with each other. So now you know. And now you know why I decided to leave them at any cost because they were a cult group tied to the FSB. And literally one year on Halloween, I was probably 17 at the time, but Cersei went and took in a bunch of candy apples, supposedly candy apples. She put super glue in them and then gave them to the congregation as well as me. So I broke a filling, but a whole bunch of other people in the congregation, especially some of the little old people, ended up actually breaking their teeth on them. And I'll never forget it because she got in the face of this really cute little old man and started, like, he was crying because his teeth had broken and he was in his 70s and she was really nasty to him and said that he was in trouble for telling people she was part of the KGB, which is now called the FSB, and that it was his fault somehow. And then she said very nastily to him that he could sue her, and he called her a B word and said she was evil and he was going to do a lot around that. And he ended up putting a case forward in court and actually testifying against her. To this day, the state of Wisconsin still would like to put Cersei and Wilhelm in prison, and same thing in North Carolina. Unfortunately, there's been a lot of government overreach at the federal level with other people who were assets for Russia, for the CCP, and for Iran to keep them out of prison. Patricia and Kendrick and Dan as well. So I just want to let you know all that as like a backstory because I can't, when I say a ghost story, I mean, I'm talking about somebody that was actually from, Patricia and Wilhelm are from Russia. And it's just kind of important to note that coming into the Halloween holiday that, there's very real ghouls in this world. And the show isn't just about economics or politics, but it's about, what caused me to understand all these issues so that I could actually even make a show about it and just spend all that time doing research when I was living in the DC area. And as far as current events go, um, the U.S. actually just had a confrontation with China in the South Pacific today, and a B 52 bomber was involved. This is after a week where the leader of China, Xi Jinping, made a speech supposedly at the New York National Committee on United States-Chinese Relations that the most important thing was getting along with the U.S., and then noting that the same week the Chinese Defense Minister Li Shangfu was removed from his job after he was only for 7 months, and he was somebody that had actually been approved of by the West. And I just thought the whole thing was very curious because China has to actually make an effort to get along with the U.S., and they've been very clearly hostile to us instead. And my thought about it is, we want to see what they do, not just what they say, because Russia, Russian Mafia, Iran, the Chinese CCP have always been big on telling people, trafficking them, lying, hostility, aggression, threats, and then saying something to people that was supposedly really positive, and they're just going to go and do something horrible to you instead. And that's what happened this week. It was literally a situation where the leader of China's CCP one day says we're all going to get along and be happy, and then the next aggressively attacks the U.S. So that's them. It's all important to notice that China's ambassador Xi Feng was in the U.S. this week in Muscatine, Iowa. I don't know what in the world that guy is doing in the U.S., but he was literally there doing a speech on how much he loved the people of Iowa and how great they were and how close they are. Yeah, I can tell you that. Iowa is a horrible state. It has the worst child labor laws I know of. You have all kinds of weird cult marriages with kids and like 30, 40, 50-year-old men, 20-year-old men. You have children being labor trafficked all over the place, and you have just total abject human rights violations. And it was a place that famously let the Russian government and the Russian mafia dock their submarines in the 80s. And they've never been brought to task for it. What do you want to say? Culpability? They've never been held accountable. It's completely bizarre. And as I noticed in noted previous episodes on YouTube, and some now on Spotify, Wisconsin and Illinois famously rejected those Russian submarines back in the 80s, but Iowa didn't. And now they're hosting the Chinese ambassador this week, and the same week that China has attacked us again. I just want to make that really clear for you. So it's important to know that on October 17th, 2023, the U.S. government actually stopped chip sales of NVIDIA AI chips to the Chinese military. So that's part of the reason why they're getting more sort of bizarrely weird, like, oh, everything's fine, blah, 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 and then being like hostile at the same time. That's a very common move that the Russian mafia and Iran and China will make, Chinese CCP, is to say something very nice and sort of flattering at the same time come at you and attack you. They do that. I mean, I dealt for years with the Russian mafia and trying to get them to go away, and it was horrible because they would always do that. You know, they could literally be like stabbing you with one hand and trying to compliment you with the other. Never listen to anything these people say because their actions are really what matters, and their actions are usually pretty hostile. It's important to note that Senator Rick Scott has now asked that the U.S. consider removing themselves from NATO because Turkey's Erdogan, the president, has asked for a ceasefire between Israel and Iran and called Hamas not a terrorist organization. And it's notable that he also held up Sweden's membership to NATO out of concern for Swedish treatment of Muslims around the Kurdish issues and burning of the Quran in Sweden. It's a really thin reason for not accepting them, and then they're now being accepted. I think Erdogan has sufficiently weirded people out, basically, with his behavior, and certainly caused the U.S. to be concerned with his attitude and statements. So it's important that New York Mayor Eric Adams has now said the migrant situation in New York has become completely untenable, with 130,000 migrants since April 2022 to that city, and 65,000 are still in the city's care. This is a problem, he said, because draconian measures may actually be needed in order to move forward, move on. They're out of money. That's what it comes down to, basically. So, and they're just not going to be able to sustain the situation. You just can't afford. They can't take. He's saying they can't take care of the ones they have, and they can't take more to take care of. I really like the new House Speaker Mike Johnson. I'm not a hardcore conservative. I'm actually a libertarian, but I think he has addressed issues Andrew McCarthy right away would not have addressed. I trust him more on labor issues, and I know he's not a part of this weird thing that's been going on in California with the labor trafficking in the Hollywood industry. And I don't expect he's going to be somebody that's going to tolerate crazy behavior on the part of FSB and the government. And that's actually what really matters for most Americans at this point. You know, sometimes when I talk about Hollywood, I kind of joke around and say, look, they're mostly Russian and Iranian. There are a lot of Chinese CCP involved in the Hollywood industry. And even the Italian mafia really can't stand them. And there were really only a few good eggs to begin with, okay? So that's kind of what you're looking at. I have to note that back in May, I saw Patricia and Buffalo Bill up in the Mary Fryerbed Hospital in Saginaw. That was the same time that their systems had been hacked and the court systems there. And Michigan did get control of it and get their systems back under control. But it's really important to know because the fact that they came up here, like I went to an interview and they had hacked themselves into positions in the hospital is just really weird. So just for fun, I'm going to go through the top Halloween movies, top Halloween transition to Christmas movies, and that would be Batman Forever, part of the Batman series, Nightmare Before Christmas, and Sleepy Hollow, and notably they were all directed by Tim Burton. So if you want to do the Halloween to Christmas transition, either before or after Halloween, that's those are the movies that'll take you there. So I caught some segments of the Megyn Kelly show this week. I thought it was really interesting, and she was making about the whole situation with Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce, and talking about the media has completely overblown the situation and comparing Taylor Swift to um, Princess Diana. The reality about the whole situation is that Princess Diana and Prince Charles were actual royalty. And frankly, one thing I realized about Princess Diana, which is interesting, is that she really wasn't seen that positively. She was actually seen as somebody who caused a lot of trouble, and because of her lifestyle, ended up getting killed. And I didn't know that. I was really hurt when she died, but only later did I find out that people actually really didn't like her that much. And that's kind of the issue. Um, so when you start comparing, because a lot of people are comparing Taylor Swift to Princess Diana, what they're really doing with the public psychologically is they're saying, this woman has been going out to public events. She's been complaining a lot about her music being taken from her, about her being punished. She's doing a lot of attention seeking behaviors and actually going places where she's been asked not to attend, which is considered suicidality. And meanwhile, her team keeps churning out these bizarre, overblown press releases that are false. And they're basically prepping you for the reality that Taylor Swift could just be like gone. And no one's really going to be told why. But that's what you're ultimately looking at if they're doing those kinds of comparisons. To somebody like Diana, no. You don't want to be compared to Princess Diana of England. That's not a good thing. Robert Card. I got a call this week from somebody who's sort of connected to some circles I have in DC about Robert Card. Um, so the question was essentially, would he have been connected into that group with Patricia, Cersei, Wilhelm, Dan, Swiss Miss, Karen, all of that, the aliases? I give them for the sake of the show to protect viewers. And the reality is, yeah. Wilhelm very clearly said that Mayorkas would be placed into office and testified to this in court in 2019. The U.S. government was giving a heads up on that. They didn't do anything to stop it. And it's kind of important to know they were given that because Mayorkas has been horrible as the head of DHS and dealing with threats. And I have no doubt that he was placed there by their network. As far as Robert Card, the big thing to know about him, the shooter in Maine this week, is that he had problems with his hearing aids. I worked in home health for 5 years, and one of the consistent issues we saw was that a lot of the little older people actually problems with their hearing aids being hacked and with being harassed. And this guy was actually hearing things in 2 different locations, and only those places where he committed the shootings. And he was somebody who may have had some mental health problems, but he had these problems with hearing. So he's hearing disabled, and you're trying to label him as having mental health problems, and yet somebody as a healthcare provider is responsible because they didn't bother to look at the fact that his hearing aids were bothering him, or even helping him deal with the fact that they've been hacked and he may have needed new ones. And frankly, with the people I took care of, we saw quite often that they would get hearing aids, work for a little bit, get hacked again, and somebody was just being really nasty and hacking them. The same way that people hack baby monitors and scream at kids, and they've traced it repeatedly back to the Russian mafia. Same thing. So you're seriously going to have to look at the fact there was also another person involved in the attack on the Capitol back in 2020 who was actually a deaf person, student at Gallaudet University in the DC area. Again, problems with his hearing aids being hacked and hearing strange sounds. So you have to really consider that there's not being enough attention paid by healthcare providers, or worse, they're willfully ignoring those in favor of anarchy. Don't ignore people's health issues. If they tell you there's something wrong, take it seriously. But writing them off as just crazy when there's a technical issue or a health problem that needs to be addressed is just super key. It's just really important. It's like more important than anything. So, but that factor with his hearing aids not working and him only hearing those noises in 2 places is actually going to have to be addressed pretty seriously. I have to note for you, this is kind of funny, but Jada Pinkett Smith did an event this week, which was completely strange, where she was talking about how she wasn't really married to Will Smith again until they went to the Academy Awards, which makes no sense. And she had this whole crowd like screaming and freaking out. I had to check if it was even really Jada Pinkett Smith or just Jada Pinkett, because she actually looked kind of like a man in the picture. There was I think they might have photoshopped her so it looked like she'd male genitalia coming through her pants, which is just bizarre. And like one of the most strange attempts at, trying to be provocative that I could ever see, and just really offensively strange. And intentionally so. And what I would say about the event is she didn't appear sober at all, or mentally stable. And I think the biggest thing about it was that the media can't stop making fun of her for claiming that they were separated for 7 years. Well, here's the problem. And I've said this before, but I'll say it again. There was no legal marriage certificate with the state or government, right? Because sometimes they're through your city if you don't have a county, but they're usually filed with your county. Separations are filed through a lawyer in court. There's always a waiting period for a separation, and then you have a separation waiting period, then you have the divorce. A divorce goes to the court, and you get a divorce certificate. That's all in the court. Even if you don't have your certificate necessarily filed right away for whatever reason with your state central records, you still got that filing court. You still got the certificate. Even if you lose it, you can go get another certificate and you can still file in the state records whenever you need to. But once you've got it filed in the court, you're pretty much good. Filing it with central records just makes it easier for you and everybody else to find. The reality is anybody can look up where your divorce certificate is once it's finalized in court records. So the biggest problem there is that it looks like the two of them aren't legally married at all, not legally separated, and certainly not going to be legally divorced. Completely bizarre situation, right? And I note all this stuff because the U.S. government goes way out of their way to maintain legal marriages. If you're legally married, you got that marriage certificate, you're in the military, you can come back and see your spouse from time to time, but you always have to see them on your shore leave or whatever you have for the military. And it's the same thing with like prison marriages, for example. You have to, your spouse can come see you, you have to present that marriage certificate, and then they can come and visit you. They're called conjugal visits, all that stuff. And the only reason those lapse usually is because one of the two partners decides they just don't want to keep up with the marriage. But the point is the US government goes way out of their way to preserve marriages that are legal and correct. So, and they've extended themselves to doing same-sex marriage. So you can't say that they're against marriage. They're just not in favor of weird cult groups trying to have marriage or people lying or just weird stuff. Like Kendrick famously had Patricia make a Photoshop certificate for a cult group that was a Luther to try to force me to sign it to say we were married. I refused to sign it. We had this big fight. And he stole the money that I was awarded that year, actually, I was supposed to use to go to medical school. And I made fun of him for it, for being that stupid about the law when I was living in the DC back in my early 20s, unfortunately, in an event. And he got really mad and grabbed me and started throwing me around. And, of course, he was forced to let go of me and I ran off. But, I learned that making fun of people with narcissistic personality disorder who are part of the FSB is not really a good idea. But I was young and I was ticked off and I really wanted out of everything. Like I want Cersei Wilhelm to go away. I want him to go away. I didn't want to be involved in more trafficking. I had to fight really hard. And sometimes I had to mouth off in order to get some of these dorks to go away. It was a lot. It was a lot. But the point about Jada is that she doesn't take any responsibility for her behavior. She's incredibly rude. And, she's been weirdly hating on Britney Spears in her new book. And Britney's got this whole weird situation with Justin. And Justin's like coming off as another member of the Russian Mafia. And, he and his wife are now calling for everyone to calm down and both sides are going to stop fighting. Oh, well, that would be great. What would be really nice is if your people would stop harassing the rest of us in the U.S. because we're kind of tired of it. And it's pretty obvious that they don't keep themselves. They were out in Charlottesville. A lot of the shootings there were because of that network. And I've had a heck of a time over this past year, to put it nicely, and not use a swear word because of them. So yeah, it would be really great if people on both sides would calm down, namely your people, and stop bothering everyone. Because what should have been over 20 years ago is still an issue today. And apparently still an issue for the US military as of today. So, anytime, y'all want to calm down, stop harassing the rest of us, stop trying to traffic everybody, stop trying to steal everyone's stuff, I'm sure everybody will just, what? The problem will just magically disappear? I don't know. It seems to be worse these days, not better. By the way, I have to note this because it's kind of hilarious, but we do have to talk about this for a second because one of the people at Kendrick's company came to me when I was in my early 30s and started yelling at me in public, and there was a huge number of witnesses and said that I was supposed to lie and said that I was actually married to Kendrick. And I said, I'm not going to do this. They said, why not? I said, because I don't have a legal marriage. There's no legal marriage. There's no legal certificate. You don't have a certificate of the state. I'm not going to lie and say I'm married to someone I'm not married to. And he said that I was going to have to be abused and beaten up for saying I wasn't actually married to him. And I just went like, Basically, it was just like deuces for me because I don't care about someone who's that crazy and dumb. I don't care about some stupid old man that worked for the FSB. I'm going to maintain my rights at whatever cost. Kind of what U.S. citizens have to do, and it kind of sucks because I think it's great the U.S. military is out there fighting in the sea and the sand and all over. I just wish you'd do something more about the ones here in the U.S. because they don't belong free, doing whatever they want, harassing the rest of us. That's been going on for a long time. That's really what the issue is. By the way, nobody cares if SAG-AFTRA decide to continue striking because they can't not strike, basically. They kind of have to keep striking because their labor supply of people has been cut off. Same for the WGA. Don't have people to traffic anymore. What else are they going to do? I do have to note this is kind of funny, but the main agency that CA and UTA keep putting down all the time, even though all three of them have kind of been put in the, like, everyone thinks you're a little weird category, but the ones that get made fun of most, Jada Pinkett, Meghan Markle's, Amber Heard's, yeah. Right now, they are having to consider taking themselves off the public traded market and going private. Do you know why that is? It's because as a public entity, they're actually subject to SEC investigation. So Silver Lake, their major investor, wants to take them private again, which would be an incredibly smart move, except it's also extremely indicative of the fact that they're afraid of the SEC, which makes sense because the SEC is probably not going to put up with them continuing to behave the way they have. So yeah, they're probably going to have losing position and having to go back private again and at least be humiliated that way. As if Meghan Markle being in trouble for stalking the president. Has she stalked President Biden yet? I'm still trying to figure that out. I haven't seen that report yet, but I'm just thinking like that's coming next because I know she's definitely been stalking Gavin Newsom and she definitely ticked off the mayor of New York. I mean, she's taken off their main party, which is the Democratic Party, right? Or it was. Probably until the Democrats started to catch on. And some of this organization's problems is that their main founder came out recently in support of Palestine, even though he also claims to be Jewish. And it's become really obvious that some of the main founders have been claiming to be Jewish or not, or actually are part of the Iranian, Chinese, CCP, Russian axis. And that, my dear, is enough for today. We will get back to economics next week. I hope you all have a great Halloween weekend, and I hope you really enjoy yourself. And this has been the Thought Project, just so you know. Take care.